Thank you to all of you. I am so honored to be with you today. Great to see John Garvey and Tim Bush and all of you who are responsible for making this incredibly important conference a reality. For those of you students who are here, making this university really great and taking the apostolate that is the message of this university into the world, to the next generation. Wonderful to talk about principal entrepreneurship because it lets us talk about the principle of entrepreneurship, and no better theme than the dignity of work, because it is the sanctification of each man and woman's work that is the principle of entrepreneurship that starts with the individual. And that's what I want to talk about with you here today. Now, in my work as president of the American Enterprise Institute, I get to meet some of the most successful entrepreneurs in the world. I get to meet people who have grown great businesses, started them from nothing, attained great wealth and fame, and one of my real hobbies as president of AEI is asking some of the most successful people in the world to tell me their story in their own words. It's extremely interesting. And I was talking to one, and I had known him for years, but I said, you've never told me how you got where you got. Tell me your story. And he said, it's a really famous guy, you all know him. Discretion prevents me from telling you his name, but he said, well, my story starts when I was 12. And I thought, we're going to be here all day. But he said, no, it doesn't. He said, I was living in a little town in the Midwest, and one day I was out at the edge of town, 12 years old, and there was an apple orchard. And I was up against the fence looking into this apple tree. It was September, and the apples were ripe and red and beautiful. They looked so sweet and delicious. And a farmer comes up on the other side of the fence, and he says, hey, kid, I bet you wish you had one of those apples. And I said, yeah. And he said, I'll give you one for a nickel. And he said, I had a nickel. My dad had just paid me my allowance. So I gave him the nickel, and he gave me the apple. Instead of biting into it, I was kind of shining it up on my shirt, and I was walking back into town. And a businessman walked up to me, and he said, hey, kid, that's a great-looking apple. I'll give you a dime for it. And I said, that's a 100% profit margin. And a business was born, because I took my dime back to the edge of town and got 2 apples, and brought it back, and I realized that every day I could double my money. So every day I was doing this. I was taking all my pocket money and doubling it, and pretty soon I was riding my bike out, and after a while I borrowed my uncle's truck by the time I was old enough to drive, and was driving back and forth to town with boxes of apples, and this is the secret to my success. This went on for week after week, and month after month, and year after year, and then my father died and left me $100 million. So, and I'm listening to this, and I'm thinking, I need better stories. Because, in the country today, I'm looking at young people here, and a lot of these entrepreneurial stories kind of sound like that. I got to be honest. Wealthy people and successful people, they tell their entrepreneurial tales of daring do, and it just kind of still sounds like the whole thing is sort of wired, doesn't it? And part of the problem is, what I think, Catholic and as an American, that we're getting the stories wrong. See, what we've been doing is telling these stories of rags to riches forever, but that's not the sanctification of ordinary work. That's not the true principle of entrepreneurship. You know what that is for all of us? It's not the bottom to the top. It's the bottom to the middle. That's real entrepreneurship in a real life. It's funny that we've forgotten this. I look around this room, and there are, 400 of us here, and there are 400 different family stories. Some of them are, the Garveys, 3 generations ago, were scratching out potatoes in Ireland or something. 4 generations. He hastens to add. Some, at AEI, half of my colleagues, their grandparents were, running away from a shtetl in some place in Central Europe. And some of you here, your ancestors were brought here involuntarily. But let me tell you what we all have in common. We all, every single one of us, we come from ambitious riffraff, and we're proud of it. It's amazing. This is the only country in the world where we brag about the fact that our grandparents were nothing. No other country does that. Why? Because we love the right to rise. We love earned success. We love that sanctified ordinary work can lead to a better life. That's America. And that's the principle of entrepreneurship, which is a cultural principle, not an economic principle. Okay, so this is an epiphany for me. You know, I've been writing, I wrote a textbook on entrepreneurship, right? And I didn't get this principle right. So after I'm having this conversation with this friend of mine, I thought, I need to actually tell better stories. I need to find the people that are the equivalent of the ambitious riffraff in my family, but in America today, so I can fire you up, so that I can get you to embrace these principles and take them forward and save our country. Oh, by the way, I used that turn of phrase, you know, ambitious riffraff. Came to me a couple of months ago, and afterward I had a Q&A as a speech, and a guy puts up his hand, and I call on him, and he says, I just want you to know that I resent the way that you characterize my ancestors. I'm like, all right. He said, they were not ambitious. So I want to tell you about my search for the right stories that are the American story of the principle of entrepreneurship, of the dignity of work. And, you know, I started asking around, where do I go to find the most inspirational tales? At the bottom of the middle. And I got a bead on this one place. They said, people kept telling me about this place. It was going to change my life if I went to see it. It's called the Prison Entrepreneurship Program in Houston, Texas. There are places like this all over the country. There are homeless shelters, Catholic, non-Catholic organizations all over that are really trying to help people at the margins of society build their lives, which is really important when I say the margins of society, right? You listen to Pope Francis. Pope Francis always talks about what he calls la periferia de la sociedad. That is the periphery of society. That's where you find the raw stuff of greatness. So I want to find this, and these people keep telling me about the prison entrepreneurship program in Houston, so I go see them. What a thing. It's just what it sounds like, by the way. It's teaching men in the Texas penitentiary system the skills to become entrepreneurs. Now, why is that important? Let me take you down a little side alley and ask you to worry about something with me for America, and that's our criminal justice system. Now, many of you know that in the United States, we have a criminal justice system that incarcerates a lot of people, and maybe that bothers you, or maybe it doesn't. Here's what I want you to worry about with me. There are 23 million formerly incarcerated individuals in this country with a 70% unemployment rate. There are 600,000 people coming out of prison this year, and 7 in 10 won't find jobs. 50% will be reincarcerated within the first 24 months. Why? Mostly because of unemployment. Okay, we're worried about this. Why? Because a 70% unemployment rate for the incarcerated, formerly incarcerated, able-bodied people who don't have their oar in the water in a country that needs to grow, and half of them, in some states more, ending up in prison within 2 years. That's a disaster. That's a practical disaster. That's an economic disaster, and that's a moral disaster for them and for their families and for their communities and for all of us as a country. So the prison entrepreneurship program in Texas tries to solve this problem. If people can't find jobs when they come out of prison, teach them to make jobs. That's the whole idea behind it. It was started by a bunch of Christian businessmen, evangelical guys. A few hundred of them got together, and they don't take any money. They go into the prisons and they teach them business planning and budgeting, and I've seen them give elevator pitches about their businesses. A year before, 2,500 guys in the Texas penitentiary system were identified. They self-identify, actually. They sign up for this program, and they go through the program, and when they come out the day of their release, they're ready to start their companies, is the whole idea. And I've seen them talking about it. This is not like large molecule biotech pharmaceutical firms. These are landscaping companies and barbecue joints, real stuff. And they're talking about it in just evocative ways, very inspirational. Okay, now, I asked them about their results. In Texas, 50% are reincarcerated within 24 months. The guys who go to the prison entrepreneurship program, 7% are reincarcerated. 7%. They have 1/7 the reincarceration rate. That, my friends, is success. Those are metrics of success. I'm blown away by this. So I say, oh, it's incredible. They must all start these businesses. Here's the surprising thing. They said, no. They don't. 84% of them don't start their businesses. What are you talking about? They go get jobs. It turns out the entrepreneurial training, it helped them understand their lives, and they didn't need to start their businesses. Okay, scales fell from my eyes. Like, I'm a professor of entrepreneurship, right? Entrepreneurship, all about starting businesses, right? Wrong. I went to Houston looking for the secret to sanctified work with startup businesses, and I found the secret to a sanctified life, which is a startup life. See, here's what I learned from these guys in the prisons that had been in the prisons. All sources are under your control. All of the risk is risk that you can take. It's your life. Your life is an enterprise. Your life is a startup. Live it as such and prepare to have an adventure and prepare to succeed in ways that you couldn't have imagined. That's the American secret. When my grandparents got on the boat with a first grade education, illiterate, the wrong religion, what did they have? An entrepreneurial dream about their lives. Learned that from these ex-cons. I'm getting that in a textbook. Now, getting to know these guys has been life-changing for me because once you understand this, then you start asking for their secrets because their secrets are our secrets. And what they've taught me is so surprising to me that I'm writing a book about it called The Startup Life. And I want to tell you 2 of the secrets that they taught me, and I'm going to teach them to you. And if you do these things, here's my guarantee, my money-back guarantee, even though I'm not getting paid. If you do these things, you're going to have a better, happier life starting right now. Secret number 1 to the startup life, courtesy of the Prison Entrepreneurship Program graduates. Take more risk. Now, it's weird when you talk, it doesn't sound like the right piece of advice when you're talking to felons. I mean, it's like they took lots of risk. It's weird, and when you talk to people who've come out of prison, they're incredibly forthcoming about their mistakes. It's shocking and inspirational, actually, how open they are about the mistakes they made in their lives. And this one guy says, yeah, I said, why'd you go to prison? He said, well, I robbed a liquor store that was downstairs from my house. You're like, it's too much risk, man. It's I bought drugs from an undercover cop, the same cop 3 times in a row. Really risky behavior, right? So what do I mean by take more risk? To understand what I'm talking about, I want to give you some information about this new research that's kind of capturing my imagination right now, and take you kind of to the world of behavioral economics for a second. Many of you have heard of an economist who teaches at the University of Chicago. His name is Steve Levitt. Steve Levitt is one of the greatest young economists in the world right now. Not because he has better technique as an economics professor, but because he asks better questions than most of us. See, that's actually, by the way, the secret to being successful in any profession is not giving the best answers, it's asking the best questions. And that's what this guy does. He wrote, by the way, Freakonomics, which was a massive bestseller. The work that I'm talking about is newer than all of that. And he's been very interested in how people make big decisions, hard decisions in their life. Now, the data say that at any given time in any group, 1/3 of the people, so looking out here, 1/3 of you are struggling with some really hard life decision. Should I quit my job? Should I go to law school? Should I ask my girlfriend to marry me? Something big, you're struggling with it. And it doesn't mean that it's something horrible. Should I go to this law school or that law school? 2 really good options. But it's agony because you don't know the right thing to do. If you're not one of that third right now, you have been or you will be. People struggle with hard decisions all the time. Okay, Steve Levitt asked this one research question, which is, when you have a hard decision like that, do you tend to say no too much or yes too much? Right? No is, I'm not going to do that thing. I'm not going to ask her to marry me. I am not going to go get a new job. Yes is, I'm going to leap. I'm going to take that. It's the risky. I'm going to do the risky thing. Okay? Do we say yes too much? Are we too risky? Or do we say no too much? We're too risk averse. Now, under what criteria? With respect to happiness. Okay, so how did he do this research? This is the brilliant thing about behavioral economics. You can do things like this. He put out a national sort of request. He said, are you struggling with a difficult decision in your personal life? Let me make it for you with the flip of a coin. And 22,000 people signed up for his experiment. This is a great country, right? Like, 22,000 Americans like, yeah, I'm gonna let an economist at the University of Chicago flip a quarter to decide whether or not I'm gonna propose to my girlfriend. That is insane, and yet, it's a big country, and he got a lot of people signed up for it. All different sorts of decisions. They decide. It just have to be in agony, and you can't decide is the whole thing. Okay, now he didn't actually flip a coin. The information was fed into the computer system, and his team collated it, and they randomly assigned yeses and nos, 50%. By the way, it's 3/4 of the time you tend to say no when you're faced with these decisions. And most of the time it's because you don't decide and the time runs out, which is an automatic no. People are pretty risk averse, actually, or lazy. Okay, and so they send out the answers. You sent us your question, here's your answer, yes or no, now do it. Now, here's where it gets interesting. They measured the level of the participants' happiness before the experiment and a year after the experiment, right? And this is all subjective, but it's the same person. 1 means misery, 10 means total bliss. A year after the coin flip, the yeses were on average an entire digit happier than the nos. Now, what does this tell us? We don't take enough risk with our hearts. This is what the guys in the prison entrepreneurship program taught me. They were willing to take risk with their potential incarceration, with their freedom. What they weren't willing to take a risk with until they got entrepreneurship training and got out of prison and put their lives back together was with the things that really mattered. They would tell me, I was afraid to marry the mother of my children. I was afraid to take care of my kids. I was afraid to get a boring job that I committed to going to every day. See, that stuff's really scary. When I talk about marriage, that's scary for all of us. That's scary for you. I got it. But that's the risk you've got to take if you've got a startup life. A startup life says yes to those things more. Now, wow, this is really, really blowing my mind because I work with all these young people at AEI. Most of the people I work with are younger than I am. And I'll talk to these young guys and get to know them, there's 30 and under. And Washington is the most dysfunctional dating market in the world, right? And I'll say, so how's it going? You still dating that girl? It's like, yeah. How long you been going out? Like 8 years, stuff like that, right? And sometimes people will ask, what do you think I ought to do? And now I say, I got the data. I know what you ought to do. You should go back to your apartment and listen to your favorite music for like an hour. And then you should go over to her place. And when she opens the door, you should get down on one knee. You should say yes and hope she says yes too. That is taking risk. Okay, here's the lesson for you. Most of you here are married. Most of you here are not. But all of us are not giving our hearts away to something. All of us. Think about the risk that you're not taking. If you're going to live a startup life, if you're going to be happier, if you're going to be an adventurer, if you're going to sanctify your life, which is also your work, think about that risk and say yes. Lesson number 2 of the startup life. Use your weaknesses to make yourself truly successful. When you were in high school and your guidance counselor was trying to figure out what you should do, one of the things that the guidance counselor did was probably did something like a Myers-Briggs test or a personality test. Why? To find out kind of what your personality is and what you're good at, and then match that up with your natural strengths. Why? Because the secret to success is ascertaining your strengths and matching your life to those strengths. It's very conventional advice. It's very solid advice. There's a great, our friends at Gallup Polling, which is right down the street here, they have their most profitable product right now is called the Gallup Strengths Finder. Some of you have done it. It's a great thing. You can go on their website, pay a few bucks. I recommend that you do it. They'll ask you about 300 kind of unrelated, random-sounding questions, But there's a complicated statistical algorithm behind it that's doing something called a factor analysis based on your answers, and it's going to tell you, based on a lot of the data that they've collected on millions of individuals in the past, your 5 big strengths and your 5 big weaknesses. Why? Because you're going to learn something about your strengths. It's very interesting. I learned things about myself. What's the implication? Use those strengths to be more successful. Avoid those weaknesses so you won't be unsuccessful. Standard stuff. Your mother told you that too. Everybody knows that. That's not completely right. Why? Because it is your weaknesses, the things that you struggle with, your vulnerabilities, the things that you're embarrassed about, that actually connect you with other people. And it is your connection with other people that is the true source of your strength. Now think about it. Something you're really, really great at. If you want to connect with another person, if you want another person to know you and like you, you don't say, well, my main characteristics are, being born rich and being really, really intelligent. That's hard to relate. That's not relatable. That's not something that attracts people to you. It doesn't make you winsome. What actually attracts other people to you is a vulnerability. It's something you're not so good at, something that you can understand about each other. It's funny when you talk to very successful for-profit entrepreneurs ordinarily, the stories that they'll tell you about their early success usually have to do with early failures. So somebody who's a contributor to my organization is Bernie Marcus. He's the founder of the Home Depot. Phenomenally successful. Very, very wealthy. When you ask Bernie Marcus, which I have, to tell me the story of the success of the Home Depot, he tells you stories about bankruptcies and raiding the kids' college fund and wondering if they're going to go out of business. And they opened their first store on Peachtree Street in Atlanta, and it was such a disaster that he had his kids out on Peachtree Street waving $1 bills, trying to bribe passersby to just go into the store. Why doesn't he tell you about the first billion? Because that doesn't connect him with anybody. If he wants people to understand the nature of his success, he starts by talking about his failure. There's a startup life principle in that as well. The prison entrepreneurship program, it's funny. You say to these guys, so how do you like your job? And they'll tell you a little bit about their job, but what most fulfilling for them is connecting to young people, inevitably. I'll talk to these guys, they'll be, I'm spending my free day going into the high school, talking to these young guys saying, don't take drugs, because if you do, let me tell you what it's like when you go to prison. Or take responsibility when a girl gets pregnant, because if you don't, you're going to miss out on the lives of your children. Let me tell you how that feels, because it happened to me. They're using their weaknesses, they're using their vulnerabilities, they're using their mortifications as a way to connect with other people. And that's the secret of the success of their life. It is pain and mortification that brings us closer to the Lord. And being brought closer to the Lord is synonymous with being brought closer to each other. That's the cosmic nature, the seamless garment of life. It's funny, as I was considering this, I remembered a conversation that I had with actually an old friend, a guy I had known for a long time. He wasn't somebody from the prison entrepreneurship program. He'd had kind of a hard life, though. He was born wealthy, and he was the scion of a publishing family, like a 5th generation famous name in publishing. He grew up with everything, and inevitably he was going to wind up in the publishing business, which he didn't care about. He was a wastrel. He was entitled. He said he basically just partied his way through high school, and then as a legacy went to some fancy university. Barely made it through, drinking the whole time. He said in his senior, not any of that. In his senior year, he was coming home from a party, blind drunk. And he said that, it's like 3 o'clock in the morning, like every party, and he ran over a pedestrian and killed him. Now, if you're me, you don't know which you'd prefer to be, the driver or the pedestrian. Because either way, your life is over, right? Either way. And, okay, what happens? He's a wealthy guy, a well-connected guy. But it's not like you can get away with it entirely. The police come, he's arrested, he goes to court, involuntary manslaughter, a year in prison. Spends a year in prison. Now, when he's in prison, he said he had a chance for the very first time to think about his life. And here's the question he posed to himself. What does my mistake mean? What does it mean? Why did I have this happen? How can I turn it into a source of meaning and purpose for me? When he came out, he finished his bachelor's degree, and he went and got a master's in social work and became a drug and alcohol rehabilitation counselor. That's how he turned his weakness into a source of cosmic, beautiful, spiritual strength. Now, he told me that, and this is after, on the tail of hearing all these stories from the prison entrepreneurship program guys, I thought, it's great, but, that's profound, and it's actually really heavy, but I can't really relate to that. Nothing like that has ever happened to me. And he's funny. He helped me because here's what he said. He said, yeah, but there's some weakness of yours, something embarrassing, mortifying. And I bet you it's accidentally turned into one of the greatest sources of strength for you. And I thought about it, and he's right. There is something. Because we all have something. So as you're thinking about yours, let me tell you about mine. When I was 19, 18, I went to college, and by the time I was 19, I was no longer in college. And the debate was just like dropped out, kicked out, splitting hairs. And at this point, so I was faced with the need to do something with my life. And it turns out that I had this dream since I was a little kid. Believe it or not, I wanted to be the greatest French horn player in the world. That's all I wanted. I had practiced. I was just born to be a classical musician. And so I went on the road as a professional French horn player and made my living playing chamber music. I played for a couple of years with a jazz guitar player named Charlie Bird. And then I wound up in the Barcelona Symphony, where I played for a bunch of seasons. And it was a great life. But I got to tell you, it was one thing that was gnawing at me. I have nothing against not going to college. Nothing. I don't know if all my kids are going to go to college. I don't care, actually. But it bugged me that I had failed. And it disappointed my father, who was a college professor, and my grandfather, who was a college professor. Family stuff is heavy. And I thought, I'm going to try again. But I had a problem. I had no money, and I didn't live anyplace. So a colleague, a friend of mine, he said, why don't you sign up for correspondence school? I said, what's that? He said, it's great. It's all over the world. There's correspondence schools, and you sign up, and you study through the mail, and you do all your coursework, and it's really cheap, and you don't have to live anyplace. I said, phenomenal. So I did a little bit of research, and I found this place in Trenton, New Jersey, called Thomas Edison State College, which was a kind of an adult learners thing through the state of New Jersey, and they had a huge correspondence program, so I signed up, and I started taking classes by correspondence, and it was great. And I killed it in correspondence school. I got like all A's in correspondence school. Which I'm at a great university, so that's not very impressive, but still. And it changed my life because I was so interested. I studied economics. I had no interest in economics before that, but I found economics, and it was like, this was amazing. It's great. And I finished my bachelor's degree a month before my 30th birthday. Okay? So graduation day for me was putting on my slippers and walking out to my mailbox and picking up my diploma and walking back in the house. That was walking for me. That was marching, right? And I didn't know what to do next. So I wrote to one of my mail order professors that I'd never met, some retired guy way out in the sticks in Colorado. And I said, what do I do next? I loved this. And he said, you did really well in my classes. I think that this is really reaching, man. I think you should get a PhD. And nobody had ever said that to me before. So I wrote back to him. I said, where? And you know what he said? Harvard. Harvard. It's like Shangri-La. No way. And it filled me with this confidence that I had never had in my life because nobody had ever said something like that to me. I wasn't a good student. I wasn't meritorious. But you know what? With that confidence, I decided I was going to do that. And so my wife Esther and I, we resolved that she was going to support me and I was going to go study my doctorate. And I made some calls to Cambridge, Massachusetts and got some information about apartments. And I was all set. And I filed my application with love and affection and care. And I got rejected in 1 week. It was just like, no. Because it turns out that Harvard is not in the market for a 30-year-old correspondence school graduate French horn playing dropout. It turns out that's not their core demo, right? So, it was a blow. I didn't know what to do. So I said to Esther, I feel kind of like I need more information. I'm going to call them up and see how close I came. And she's like, you're an idiot, right? But I did it anyway. So I call up and I call this nice lady in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Harvard University. And I say, I just got, I applied to your PhD program in economics and I got rejected. She says, I'm sorry. So I said, no. I'm not mad. I just want to know, how close did I come? She says, okay. And I hear, this is back in the 90s, right? And so I hear file cabinets opening and closing and papers rustling. She comes back after 2 minutes and she says, not close. And then, and so now I'm bargaining, right? It's like stages of grieving here. So I say, was I in the top half? And she's like, no, it was horrible. It was horrible. So I went down a couple of places in the rankings because Harvard's a great university. And I went down a couple of places and I got rejected. And I went down a couple more places and I got rejected. Finally, I found a graduate school that wasn't paying close attention and I got in. And I never told anybody about that because I got to graduate school and all my colleagues had gone to good universities, better universities, more traditional, conventional universities, and I hadn't. So they would say, so where did you do your undergraduate? And I would say, university, and change the subject. And then I went out and I became an academic. I got a professorship. And all of my colleagues, I taught at Syracuse for a long time, and all my colleagues had gone to Harvard. And they would say, yo, where'd you go to college? And I would just change. I didn't lie, by the way. It was on my resume on the internet, but nobody ever asked. And then something big changed in my life. In 2008, they asked me to be the president of the American Enterprise Institute, this fancy academic think tank here in Washington, D.C. Everybody at AEI went to Harvard. Everybody. We hire people who went to Harvard and other similar institutions like Catholic University of America. And I was, absolutely, and getting better by the day, by the way. And when I was, when I first came to AEI, here was my paranoid fantasy. The Washington Post was going to figure out that I went to correspondence school. And there was going to be a big expose. The American Enterprise Institute, the conservative American Enterprise Institute is run by a hack, a patsy, a graduate of correspondence school. What a joke. Shows the intellectual state of American conservatism, doesn't it? I was just laying awake nights. It was stupid, I know. So I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell any of my colleagues. And then I hired this guy named Andrew Kelly. This guy's got a platinum resume. He did UC Berkeley, Dartmouth undergrad, UC Berkeley for his PhD. I hired him to do work on the economics of higher ed. Now, you got to understand something about AEI. It's like a great university. It's like CUA. It has pure academic freedom. I hire scholars in a certain area. They decide what they're going to do work on. No censorship. I never spike anything. Okay? I believe in the competition of ideas. So I brought in Andrew Kelly the first day because, look, higher ed's all screwed up. I don't have to tell you. It's too expensive. Too many people don't finish. There's too much debt, and there's no diversity of ideas, and conservative viewpoints are suppressed. And it's not right. So I said to Andrew, what's your first expose going to be on, man? And he said, I've always dreamed about doing an expose about fly-by-night correspondence schools. And I'm like, oh boy. So, but I'm being cool, like maybe nothing happens, right? And I was like, oh yeah, it's good. Andrew, do that. And he goes away, I don't hear anything for a few weeks. And I get an email from Andrew, middle of the night. Hey Arthur, it's like midnight. I'm on the Wikipedia site for this place called Thomas Edison State College in Trenton, New Jersey, and they're claiming you're an alum. So you got to get that cleared up, dude. So like the jig is up. I'm doomed. I'm talking about with Esther. She says, look, man, go big or go home. Write about it in the New York Times. So I did. I wrote a column called My Cheap, Valuable College Degree, where I talked about the fact that had it not been for Thomas Edison State College, the blessed institution that gave me my undergraduate experience, I would not have gone to college. I would not have gotten a PhD. I would not have become a college professor. I would not be the president of the American Enterprise Institute. And quite frankly, I would not be here speaking to you today. And furthermore, I got the entire degree for 10 grand in today's dollars, including the books, and including a sticker for my car, which I didn't put on the car because I was embarrassed. And I thought, okay, and I published it, by the way. And it was the #1 piece on their website for 2 solid weeks. And I was starting to think, when's the expose going to come? When's the denunciation going to come? And it didn't come. You know what came? Hundreds of messages from people I'd never met. I did that too. Thank you for writing that article. Entrepreneurs in their lives. It's one lady, she writes to me, she says, my son is 31, he dropped out of college 10 years ago and he's really struggling, and I showed him your article, and I think he's going to sign up at Thomas Edison State College. Thank you for giving my son a second chance. Giving my son a second chance. And you know what I realized? I have dedicated my life to equal opportunity, to earn success, to the sanctification of work. My life, my spiritual life, my professional life, my whole heart and soul. And there's one thing in my vita that connects me truly to the people at the margins of society, and I've been running away from it and denying it for 20 years. You know my problem? I'm an elitist against myself. And it took my own employee outing me to connect me with the people I care about the most, changing my career and changing my life. Because I'm going to spend the rest of my career and the rest of my life on the cause of the radical equality of human dignity through opportunity, because that is the promise of America. And I needed that experience to teach me that. Now, that's the second lesson. It's using your weakness, because I used my weakness. I didn't mean to. I wish I did it on purpose. You have something like that in your life too. You have something you're embarrassed about, something you're running away from, something that mortifies you. Use it to connect with others. That is your vocation. You must use it. Mortify yourself. Show other, you're the successful people. The weakness that you have will inspire others, will lift them up. And that's why we're put on earth, and you know it as well as I do. Let me finish that last story before I leave you. One of the people who called me after that piece came out in the New York Times was the president of Thomas Edison State College. And he didn't know that one of his grads was running a think tank in D.C. And he said, would you come and be a graduation speaker? And I thought to myself, what's commencement at a correspondence school? Is it like 8 guys around a table? I don't know, right? But I said yes, and I went up, and it was in the Trenton ice rink. And I walk in with my son Carlos, he was 13 at the time, and there were 5,000 people cheering for their families and hundreds of people crossing the stage. It turns out it's the second largest public education institution in the state of New Jersey. A third are active military. More than half are the first generation to go to college. Most of them have started out poor. Man, this is the American dream. And I was sitting up there, I gave some speech about happiness or some claptrap, I don't know. I was wearing my dad's cap and gown. And I was sitting there in the front row watching these people cross the stage, and I thought, these are my people. I just wish I'd known it. And there's one lady, and I just remember this one, everybody got to say, because there were 700 people or something crossing the stage. One lady, you get to say your name and one thing, okay, because there's no time. So she stops, and she says her name, and then she's like 45 years old, lines on her face. She's lived. And she says, for this moment, I just want to thank my 5 children and the Son of the living God. And I thought, that is a startup life. That's a true entrepreneur. That's the American spirit. That's the story I need to tell. If we can bring back that spirit again, look, we're the lucky ones. Make more people lucky. This is the land of the lucky. And if we can give more people the true spirit of entrepreneurship, which is the principle of entrepreneurship, which is the dignity of work, which is the sanctification of our lives, we get a new generation. We get a new time. We can truly save this country along the lines that the founders envisioned for you and me and the rest of the ambitious riffraff. God bless you.